My name was Rachel Mercer, and on Christmas morning, my mother told me we sold your Tesla and emptied your savings so your sister could put a down payment on her apartment. She said it the way you might ask someone to pass the rolls, hands still wet from rinsing green beans in the sink. The tree lights blinked like nothing was wrong. My father did not even look up from the dining table. He slid a paper across the wood toward me, his voice low and flat. "Sign as her guarantor," he said, "or you can start looking for somewhere else to stay." There was no screaming, no shattered ornaments, no dramatic scene. Just a calm, practiced cruelty that made my stomach go cold. I did not argue. I did not cry. I nodded once like I understood, then I walked upstairs and started packing. Because in that moment I finally saw the truth. I was not their daughter. I was their solution. The house smelled like cinnamon candles and roasted ham, the kind my mom always insisted on baking even when no one asked for it. Outside, the neighborhood looked like a postcard: porch lights, wreaths, a plastic reindeer in the yard across the street. Inside, it felt like a courtroom where everyone had already decided the verdict. Mom wiped her hands on her red holiday apron and turned to face me fully, like she was waiting for me to react. Her eyes flicked to my face, then away, then back again. She wore her soft voice, the one she used in public, the one that made strangers say, "What a sweet woman, what a devoted mother." I stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the dining room, still in my pajama pants, hair a mess, my phone in one hand, because I had just been checking the weather like a normal person who thought Christmas was going to be normal. My father sat at the table with his coffee and the newspaper folded too neatly. He had already put on a sweater, navy blue, the good one. He looked like the version of himself he showed at church: calm, contained, respectable. My sister Nicole was nowhere in sight. I did not hear her feet on the stairs, did not hear her voice. That absence was its own kind of message. Mom said my name, gentle, almost affectionate. "Rachel." I said, "What?" She took a breath. It was not a shaky breath. It was measured, like she had practiced it in the mirror. "We sold your Tesla," she said, "and we moved the money out of your savings. Nicole needs a down payment for her apartment. The lease is time sensitive." For a second, my brain tried to correct what I had heard, like maybe she meant they sold a toy Tesla, maybe she meant they moved a little money from a joint account. But I did not have a toy Tesla, and I did not have a joint account. I had a car I worked for and a savings account I guarded like it was a living thing. I blinked once, slow. "You sold my car?" Mom lifted her shoulders in a small shrug, as if this were annoying but manageable. "It was sitting in the driveway," she said. "It was just going to depreciate. And you work so much you barely drive it anyway." I stared at her hands, at the way she twisted the dish towel around her fingers. I noticed a little smear of flour on her wrist, like she had been kneading dough. That detail should have made me feel warm, nostalgic, like childhood. Instead, it made my throat tighten, because she had been baking and planning and stealing at the same time. The same hands that used to braid my hair before school, now wiping away evidence of what they had done. My father finally looked up. He did not look apologetic. He looked annoyed, like I was running late for something and it was inconveniencing him. He slid the paper closer, pushing it across the table with 2 fingers. "This is the guarantor agreement," he said. "The landlord wants it. The bank wants it. Whatever they want," he corrected, and his jaw tightened. "Nicole needs stability. You are going to sign it." My mouth went dry. I did not touch the paper yet. I could see my name printed on it, bold and official. I could see blank spaces. I could see the weight of the thing without reading every line. I worked in project management for a medical software company, and my job had trained me to smell risk from across the room. This paper was risk with a bow on it. I said, "I need to see Nicole." Mom looked toward the stairs. She is getting ready, she said quickly. She did not want to talk right now. She is stressed. Stressed. I almost laughed. Nicole was always stressed when she needed something. She was stressed when she maxed out a credit card. She was stressed when she quit a job because her manager was toxic. She was stressed when she wanted a new phone, a new couch, a new life she did not have to build with her own hands. My father tapped the paper with his knuckle. "Sign," he said. I stared at him. "Dad." He cut me off with a look. "Do not start," he said. "Do not make this into some emotional performance. We are not doing that today. You are an adult. You understand how family works." Mom nodded like she agreed with him. "We did not do this to hurt you," she said. "We did this because we had to. You have always been the responsible one. You always land on your feet. Nicole, she needs help." The words responsible one landed in my chest like a familiar chain. I had carried that label like a medal when I was younger. Now it felt like a hook in my skin. Responsible meant available. Responsible meant the one you could take from without feeling guilty. I looked at the tree in the living room, lights blinking softly. Under it were presents wrapped in matching paper because my mom cared about appearances. There was even one with my name on it in neat handwriting. For a sick second I wondered what it was. Something small and symbolic. Maybe a sweater, maybe a book, maybe a little joke gift to pretend we were a normal family. The idea of unwrapping anything in that room made me feel nauseous. I said, "How did you sell my car?" Mom's eyes slid away again. "Your father has his ways," she said. "We had the spare key." My heart beat once. Hard. Spare key. I had given my mom a spare key months ago when she insisted it was safer. "In case of emergencies," she had said. I remembered handing it over at the kitchen counter, feeling a little proud that I could help, that I could trust. Now that memory burned like acid. I said, "And my savings." Mom's lips pressed into a line. "Rachel," she said, "please do not make me explain every detail. We moved it. It is still your money, technically. It is just doing something important right now." Doing something important. Like my future was a tool. My father's voice sharpened. "Sign the paper," he said. "Nicole is meeting the landlord tomorrow. If you do not sign, the apartment is gone, and I am not going to let her lose it because you want to throw a fit." I stared at the paper. My hands did not shake. That surprised me. Inside, something was shaking, but not my hands. Inside, something was cracking cleanly, quietly, like ice splitting under a lake. I said, "If I sign that, I am responsible if she cannot pay." My father's eyes narrowed. "Do you think she is not going to pay?" he asked, like I had insulted her honor. I almost said, "Of course I think that." But what good would it do? We all knew the truth. Nicole paid when it was convenient. She paid when someone else was watching. She did not pay when she could cry and make someone else rescue her. Mom stepped closer, voice softer. "Sweetheart," she said, "you have good credit. You have the job. It is just a signature. Nicole is trying. This is her fresh start." My lungs felt tight. I thought about the double shifts I had taken last winter when we had layoffs, and I was terrified of losing my position. I thought about eating yogurt for dinner to save money, telling myself it was fine because I was building something. I thought about the Tesla I bought used and carefully, not as a flashy toy, but as proof I could make it on my own. I thought about how proud I had felt driving it home, calling my mom, expecting her to be happy for me. She had been happy, but not for my success, for what it meant I could provide. I said, "You did not ask me." Mom's face tightened, just for a second. Her mask slipped. "We knew you would say no," she admitted, then quickly added, "And we did not have time for a debate. Not with the deadline." My father leaned back in his chair, impatience rolling off him. "Here is what is going to happen," he said. "You are going to sign. Then you are going to come sit with us like a normal family. And later, we will open presents and stop pretending this is some tragedy." I looked at him. Really looked. He had always scared me a little. Not because he hit us, not because he yelled all the time, but because his disappointment felt like punishment. When I was a teenager, his silence could ruin my week. Even as an adult, a part of me still searched his face for approval like a starving thing. I waited for that part of me to speak up, to beg, to bargain, to try to fix it. Instead, I felt something else, a calm, hard clarity. I said, "If I do not sign." My father's eyes did not blink. "Then you can start looking for somewhere else to stay," he said. "You do not get to live under this roof and sabotage your sister. You want to act like you are not part of this family? Then fine. Go be independent. See how that feels?" Mom's eyes widened slightly, like she did not like how blunt he was being, but she did not stop him. She just stood there, hands clasped, waiting to see what I would do. I thought about the last 2 years, about moving back in after my lease ended because my mom insisted it would help me save faster. It made sense, at least on paper. I would help with groceries, with utilities, with little repairs. I would stay in my old room and work and build savings, then move out again in a year. That was the plan. Somehow, the plan had turned into them treating my money like a family resource. Somehow, my presence had turned into permission. I stared at the paper again. My name, my responsibility, my future in black ink. I reached for it slowly. My father's shoulders relaxed, just a fraction. Mom's mouth softened, relief creeping in. I picked up the paper. I folded it once. Neat. Then I folded it again. Smaller. More controlled. I slipped it into my pajama pocket. My father frowned. "What are you doing?" he asked. I looked at him. I said, "I am going upstairs." Mom blinked. "To sign?" she asked, hopeful. "You can sign in your room if you want, just bring it back down." I nodded once. "Maybe," I said. I walked past them. My bare feet moved across the hardwood floor. I could feel the heat from the vents, could hear the soft holiday music playing from a speaker in the living room, something cheerful and fake. Each step felt like I was moving through a memory that no longer belonged to me. Upstairs, the hallway was dim. The framed family photos lined the wall, vacations and birthdays and smiles. In most of them, Nicole was pressed into the center like she belonged there more than anyone. In most of them, I was slightly to the side, the one holding the camera bag, the one making sure everyone had water, the one asking if we should head out early to beat traffic. Responsible. I went into my bedroom and closed the door softly. Not with anger, not with drama. Softly, like I was trying not to wake someone. Then I stood there for a moment, breathing. The room looked like a time capsule. Pale walls, old dresser, a couple of books stacked neatly. I had brought my adult life into it in small ways. My laptop, my work bag, a plant on the windowsill. But it still carried the feeling of being temporary, like I was always supposed to leave again. I pulled the guarantor paper out and laid it on my desk. I did not sign it. I did not even pick up a pen. Instead, I opened my drawer and pulled out a duffel bag. My hands moved automatically at first. Clothes, toiletries, charger. I grabbed the important things without thinking. Passport, birth certificate, the small box where I kept the title and registration for the Tesla, even though I suddenly did not know if those papers meant anything anymore. As I packed, I listened. Downstairs, muffled voices, my mom's soft tone, my father's low, firm replies, the music still playing. A part of me waited for the guilt to hit, for the doubt, for the thought that maybe I was overreacting. Families did messy things sometimes, right? Families borrowed. Families helped. Families made mistakes. But this was not messy. This was clean. This was calculated. They had taken my car. They had taken my savings. They had set up a paper trail that would trap me if I signed. They had backed it with a threat. Sign or leave. That was not a mistake. That was a plan. I sat on the edge of the bed for a second, duffel bag open at my feet. I looked at my phone. No notifications yet. Nothing from the world outside. It was still early. The sky outside my window was pale, the kind of cold morning where everything looked sharp and brittle. I thought about calling someone, a friend, a coworker, anyone, but I did not want to explain it out loud yet. Saying it would make it real in a way I was not ready for. I also did not want anyone to talk me into staying, into smoothing it over. I stood up again and kept packing. When I had enough to leave, I walked into the hallway and paused at the top of the stairs. I could see my parents below, my mom standing near the kitchen, my dad near the dining table. They looked like they had been holding their breath. My mother looked up first. Her face brightened with forced warmth. "Are you ready?" she called. "We can get this done and have a nice morning." I walked down the stairs slowly, my duffel bag pulled at my shoulder. The paper in my pocket felt heavy, like a stone I refused to swallow. My father's eyes tracked the bag. His mouth tightened. "Where are you going?" he asked. I stopped at the bottom step. I said, "I am leaving." The words hung there. For a second, no one moved, like the house itself did not believe me. Mom's eyes widened. "Rachel," she whispered. "What are you doing?" "It is Christmas." I nodded once. "I know." My father stood, chair scraping slightly. "Do not be ridiculous," he said. "Put your things down. Sign the paper. We are not doing this." I looked at him and felt something strange. Not fear. Not even anger. Just a quiet certainty. I said, "You already did it. You sold my car. You emptied my savings. You threatened to throw me out. There is nothing left for me to do except leave." Mom stepped forward, hands lifted like she wanted to touch me but did not dare. "Honey," she said, "please. We can talk about this. We will pay you back. We will figure it out. Nicole is counting on us." There it was again. Nicole is counting on us. Not Rachel is hurting. Not Rachel deserves respect. Not Rachel should have been asked. Just Nicole. Always Nicole. I glanced toward the living room. The presents under the tree looked obscene now, paper and bows hiding emptiness. My father's voice turned colder. "If you walk out that door without signing," he said, "do not come back expecting anything. Do you understand me?" I looked at him, then at my mother. Her eyes were glossy, but her mouth was tight. She wanted me to fold. She wanted me to be good. She wanted me to save everyone from discomfort. I said, "I understand." I walked toward the kitchen table. For a second, my mom looked hopeful, like I was about to sit down and sign. Instead, I reached for a notepad and a pen from the drawer, the same drawer where she kept tape and scissors for wrapping presents. My father frowned. "What is that?" he asked. I did not answer. I wrote quickly, one short message, careful, deliberate. My handwriting was steady. I tore the page cleanly and placed it in the center of the table where they would have to look at it. I did not explain. I did not soften it. I did not add love or holiday wishes. I did not give them an argument they could twist. Mom's eyes darted to the note. "Rachel," she said, voice shaking now. "What is this?" I slid the pen back into the drawer. I adjusted my duffel bag on my shoulder. My father reached for the note, but I was already stepping away. I said, "You will read it tomorrow." My mother's breath caught. "Tomorrow," she repeated, confused. I nodded. "Tomorrow," I said again. and I walked to the front door. The cold air hit my face the moment I stepped outside. It felt cleaner than the house behind me. The porch lights blinked, trying their best to sell the story of a perfect family Christmas. Behind me, through the door, I heard my mother call my name once more, soft and desperate. Rachel. I did not turn around. I walked down the steps, across the yard, and out to the sidewalk. My car was gone, of course. The spot in the driveway looked like a missing tooth. I stood at the curb and pulled my phone from my pocket, thumb hovering over the screen as I tried to decide who to call first, and that was when I heard the front door open behind me, and my father's voice cut through the cold. "Rachel," he called, sharper now, like he could still command me back into place. I kept walking, but my heart started to pound, not because I was afraid of him anymore, but because I could feel the next part coming, the part where they would realize I was not bluffing, and the part where Nicole would finally wake up and find out what my parents had done in her name. I reached the corner and stopped, breath fogging in front of my face. I looked down at my phone again and forced myself to take one slow breath, then another, because if I did not, I might do something reckless, something loud, something that would give them the drama they expected. I was not going to give them that. I was going to give them consequences. But not today. Not yet. Not until I knew exactly what I was dealing with, and exactly what I needed to do next. The farther I got from my parents' house, the more I realized I had been holding my breath for years. The cold had a bite to it, and the air smelled like chimney smoke and wet pavement, but it still felt cleaner than that kitchen with the blinking tree and the quiet betrayal sitting at the table like an honored guest. My duffel bag bounced against my hip with every step, and my fingers ached from gripping my phone too hard. I kept walking anyway, past frosted lawns and inflatable snowmen, past windows glowing with warm light, like everyone else had been handed the Christmas they expected. I did not know where I was going yet. I just knew I was not going back. A couple of blocks away, I stopped under a street lamp and finally looked at my screen. Notifications stacked up, missed calls from my mother, from my father, and a number I recognized as Nicole's. Nobody asked if I was okay. Nobody asked where I was. It was all the same message dressed up in different words. Come back. Fix this. You are being dramatic. You are hurting your sister. Family first. I stared at that phrase until it blurred. Family first always seemed to mean me last. I typed a text to my friend Dawn, then deleted it. I typed another, more careful, then deleted that too. I hated the idea of spilling this mess into someone else's morning. Dawn had a little boy who still believed in magic, and she probably had wrapping paper stuck to her socks right now. Still, my thumb hovered, because pride was a luxury I did not have. I sent a simple line. Are you awake? I need a place to sit for a while. I can explain. Her reply came fast. Yes. Come. I am making coffee. Use the side door. My husband is still asleep. My throat tightened at the word come. It sounded like permission. It sounded like safety. It made my eyes burn in a way I refused to acknowledge on the sidewalk. I ordered a rideshare with fingers that finally started to shake, and while I waited, I looked back once toward the direction of my parents' street. I could not see the house from there, but I could feel it behind me anyway, like a weight still trying to pull me into the role I had played for so long. I was the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who never made a scene. I had been trained to absorb discomfort so other people could stay comfortable. The car arrived, and I climbed into the back seat. The driver wished me a Merry Christmas, cheerful and automatic, and I managed a small nod. The radio played a holiday song that suddenly felt like a joke. Dawn lived in a modest townhouse across town, the kind of place with a little porch and a welcome mat that had been stepped on so many times the letters were fading. When I got there, the neighborhood was quiet, The kind of quiet that comes from families sleeping in after late nights and early excitement. I used the side door like she told me, and the warmth inside hit my face immediately, along with the smell of coffee and buttered toast. Dawn met me in the kitchen in fuzzy socks and a worn sweatshirt that said Lake Erie on it. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun and her eyes widened when she saw my bag. She did not ask questions first. She just stepped in and hugged me, firm and steady, the kind of hug that does not demand words. "Honey," she said softly, "what happened?" The tears threatened again. I swallowed them back. I did not want to fall apart. Not yet. Falling apart felt like giving in, and I had already given enough. I pulled back and said, "Can I just sit?" She nodded and guided me to a chair at the kitchen table. Her table was crowded with normal life. A cereal box, crayons, a half-folded dish towel, a pile of mail. It was not perfect, but it felt real. That reality made my chest loosen in small increments. Dawn poured coffee into a mug and slid it toward me. "You can stay here as long as you need," she said. "No questions, no guilt, no guilt." The words almost made me laugh, because guilt had been the currency of my family for as long as I could remember. Guilt was how my mother got what she wanted without raising her voice. Guilt was how my father kept the whole house in line without ever admitting he was doing it. I wrapped my hands around the mug. It warmed my fingers. My phone buzzed again on the table, and I turned it face down. Dawn lowered her voice. "Is it your parents?" she asked, and I heard the carefulness in her tone, like she was approaching a bruise. I nodded once. It came out as a whisper. "They sold my car." Her eyebrows shot up. "What?" My voice tried to break, and I forced it steady. "They sold the Tesla," I said. "They said they needed the money for Nicole's down payment, and they emptied my savings." Then my dad handed me paperwork and told me to sign as her guarantor or leave the house. Dawn stared at me like she had not heard correctly. "On Christmas," she said. I nodded again. Like it was nothing. Like I was supposed to be grateful they included me in the conversation at all. Dawn's mouth tightened. "Rachel," she said, "that is theft." The word theft landed heavy, because part of me still wanted to soften what happened. Part of me still wanted to call it a misunderstanding, to protect the story of my parents as good people who just made a bad choice. But Dawn said it plainly, and plain words cut through manipulation better than anything. I stared into my coffee. "I did not scream," I said. "I did not even argue. I just left." Dawn reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You did what you had to do," she said. "You are not wrong for that." I wanted to believe her. I did. In pieces. But the old conditioning was still there, whispering that I was ungrateful, that I was dramatic, that I was hurting family. It was hard to kill a voice that had lived in your head for decades. While Dawn moved around the kitchen, cleaning up quietly, I sat there and let the last 12 hours replay in my mind, but now, with new eyes. I saw my mother's calm face, her careful phrasing, the way she already had excuses lined up. I saw my father sliding that paper across the table like a final step, not a request. And I saw what I did not want to see in the moment, how rehearsed it all felt, how prepared they were for my compliance. It was not sudden. It was not a desperate choice made in the middle of the night. It was planned. That realization did not hit like a thunderclap. It settled like a stone. I thought about the spare key my mother insisted on keeping. I thought about how often my father asked casual questions about my finances, how much I had in savings now, what my bonus looked like, whether I had paid off my student loan. Back then, I had answered because it felt normal. It felt like family interest. Now it looked like inventory. Dawn set a plate of toast in front of me. "Eat something," she said. "You are pale." I took a bite. Mostly because she told me to. The toast tasted like nothing. My stomach felt tight and hollow. My phone buzzed again. Then again. Then again. Like a heartbeat that would not stop. I turned it over and scrolled, not reading every line, just catching the tone. My mother wrote that she was sorry for how it came out, that we could talk, that Nicole was fragile right now, that I always understood. My father wrote shorter messages. Come home. Stop making this bigger than it is. Do the right thing. Nicole's messages came in bursts. First angry, then pleading, then angry again. How could you do this to me? You always think you are better than me. I just need help. You are ruining my life. I felt something ugly and old rise in me, not the urge to fight, but the urge to fix. That was my sickness. That was how I had survived in that house, by smoothing over everything sharp so nobody else had to bleed. I set the phone down. Dawn watched me carefully. Have they done this before? She asked. Not exactly this, but have they taken from you, like it was theirs? The question opened a door I usually kept locked, and for a second I could not answer. Then the memories came, not as dramatic scenes, but as small moments that stacked into a pattern. I remembered being 16 and working weekends at a diner, handing my mother my tip money because the electric bill was due, and she looked worried. I remembered paying for Nicole's textbooks one semester because she said she would pay me back, and then never did. I remembered covering a car repair for my father when he was between jobs, and the way he said I appreciate it, like it was a compliment, not a promise. I remembered grocery trips where my mother tossed extra items into the cart and said, "You do not mind, right? Because you make good money now." Each time it had been framed as temporary. Each time it had been framed as family. Each time my consent had been assumed. In those memories, Nicole was always on the softer side of consequences. She got excuses, she got patience, she got second chances and third and fourth. I got expectations. I got the label of strong, like strength meant I did not need care. I swallowed and said, yes. Dawn exhaled through her nose. That is favoritism, she said quietly. That is a toxic family pattern, and they rely on you feeling guilty. I nodded because hearing it named made it clearer. Manipulation did not always look like yelling. Sometimes it looked like a mother's sad eyes and a father's disappointed silence. Sometimes it looked like Christmas music playing while they emptied your savings. I picked up my phone again and opened my banking app. The screen loaded slowly and my heart thumped once, hard. I was not ready to see it. Not really. But I needed to see it, because denial was how this kind of betrayal survived. When the account overview appeared, my stomach dropped. The balance that had taken me years to build looked wrong. It was not just lower, it was gutted. I stared at the numbers until they did not feel real, like I was looking at someone else's life. I tapped into recent activity, and there it was. A transfer out, then another. Both marked pending or completed. Both dated the night before Christmas Eve. Not Christmas morning. Not a last-minute scramble. The night before, while I was upstairs in my room, while my mother was probably wrapping presents, while my father was likely planning his sermon. Like tone for the kitchen. My hands went cold. Dawn leaned over my shoulder. Oh my God, she breathed. I scrolled further. I saw notes attached to the transfers. Simple labels, rent, deposit, fees, as if someone had created a neat little lie to justify taking what did not belong to them. I checked the account settings, and that was when I saw something else that made my scalp prickle. A security update, a change in login preferences, a new device recognized. I felt dizzy for a second. They did not just take money. They got into my account. They changed things. They made it easier for themselves. My chest tightened with anger so sharp it almost felt clean. The betrayal was one thing, the entitlement was another. But this, the deliberate crossing of a boundary, the quiet invasion, it was different. It made my father's paper on the table feel less like a request and more like a trap. I sat back, forcing my breathing to slow. My mind began doing what it did at work when something went wrong. It started sorting. It started building a timeline. Night before Christmas Eve, unauthorized transfers. Christmas morning, announcement and threat. Guarantor paper ready. Nicole nowhere to be seen, because she did not want to face me. My mother calm, because she thought I would fold. My father cold, because he believed fear would control me. I took another breath and felt a strange steadiness settle in. I did not like this feeling, but it was useful. It was the part of me that could survive. Dawn touched my shoulder. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I stared at the screen. I said, "I do not know yet." That was true, but it was not the whole truth. Because under that uncertainty, a decision was already forming. I was not going to sign anything. I was not going to be a guarantor for Nicole's apartment. I was not going to let my parents rewrite this into a misunderstanding. And I was not going to cover for them while they committed what felt, in plain language, like fraud. The word fraud made my throat tighten again, but it was there, hovering over everything. My phone buzzed with a new text. It was from my father. "Come home now. This is not how adults handle problems." I stared at that line, and the absurdity of it almost made me laugh. Adults handle problems by stealing their daughter's savings and threatening to throw her out on Christmas. Adults handle problems by demanding signatures and calling it family. Adults handle problems by expecting silence. Dawn watched my face. "Do not go back," she said, firm. "Not today." I nodded slowly. "I am not going back," I said, and when I said it out loud, it sounded more real. Dawn's little boy padded into the kitchen then, rubbing his eyes, hair sticking up. He looked at me and smiled sleepily, then climbed into a chair and asked for cereal like nothing in the world had changed. Dawn kissed the top of his head and poured him a bowl, and that simple, normal moment cracked something inside me. I had spent so long living in a house where love felt conditional on usefulness that I forgot what ordinary kindness looked like. While Dawn helped him, I sat with my phone and started writing notes. Not feelings. Facts. Dates. Times. What was said. What was taken. The way my father's voice sounded when he told me to leave. The way my mother avoided my eyes when she admitted they did not ask because they knew I would say no. I wrote it all down because I knew what came next in families like mine: denial, gaslighting. A story that made me the villain so they could stay the heroes. I was not going to let them do that again. When I finished, I looked at the screen and felt my jaw tighten. This was no longer just family drama. This was a legal mess waiting to happen. A secret, hidden truth under holiday wrapping paper. I set my phone down and stared at Dawn's table, at the crumbs, the mail, the crayon marks. I thought about the note I left on my parents' table, the one I told them they would read tomorrow. I imagined my mother reading it with trembling hands, my father's face hardening, Nicole's panic rising like a wave. They thought my silence meant surrender. They were about to learn what it actually meant. Dawn's voice pulled me back. "Rachel," she said gently, "do you want me to sit with you while you make some calls?" I looked up at her, and for the first time since I walked out, I felt something that was not grief or anger. It was resolve. "Not yet," I said, "but soon." I picked up my phone again, thumb hovering over the bank's customer service number, and I did not press it yet. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to be smart. I wanted to choose the right moment, the right words, the right move. Outside, the world kept celebrating Christmas. Inside, I sat at a kitchen table that was not mine, holding my life in my hands, and I understood that the next call I made would change everything. Sleep came in thin, broken pieces, like my body did not trust rest anymore. I woke before the sun, staring at a ceiling that was not mine, listening to a house that breathed differently than the one I grew up in. Dawn's place had its own rhythms, a soft hum from the refrigerator, a floorboard that sighed when someone shifted upstairs, a faint whistle from the heat kicking on. It took a moment to remember where I was and why, and when it came back, it did not hit like panic. It settled in, heavy and certain. I reached for my phone before I even sat up. The screen lit my face, and the weight of it pressed into my chest. Notifications stacked overnight, more than before, like they had tried every version of the same demand while I slept. I scrolled slowly, not reading every word, just absorbing the tone. My mother's messages grew longer and softer, full of explanations that were really excuses. My father's grew sharper, shorter, like commands stripped of their authority. Nicole's came in bursts, anger collapsing into fear and back again. Not one of them asked if I had a place to stay. Not one of them asked if I was safe. I set the phone down and sat up, swinging my legs over the edge of the bed. Dawn had given me the guest room, a small space with pale walls and a dresser that smelled faintly of cedar. A folded blanket lay at the foot of the bed, neat and intentional. That care, quiet and uncomplicated, made something in me ache. Down the hall, I heard Dawn moving around, the clink of a mug, the scrape of a chair. Her house was waking up the way normal houses did on Christmas morning, with coffee and low voices, not ultimatums. I dressed quietly and padded into the kitchen. Dawn looked up from the counter and gave me a soft smile. "You sleep at all?" she asked. "Some," I said. "Enough." She nodded like she understood exactly what that meant, and slid a plate toward me with toast and eggs. "Eat," she said, no argument in it. I sat and ate because she told me to, because my body needed it, and because I did not trust myself to make decisions about care right now. Her little boy chattered about a toy he wanted to try later, blissfully unaware of the tension humming under my skin. Watching him scoop cereal and spill milk without consequence felt like looking at another planet. When the house quieted again, Dawn took her mug and leaned against the counter, studying my face. "You going to call the bank today?" she asked. I nodded. "I am. I just want to be clear before I do." That was the truth. Fear had burned off overnight, leaving something colder and more useful behind. Clarity. I opened my banking app again, slower this time, taking screenshots as I went. The transfers were still there, no longer pending, now stamped complete. The amounts made my stomach tighten all over again, but I forced myself to keep going. I checked security settings, device history, alerts. I took pictures of everything, dates, times, locations. It felt less like snooping and more like documenting a crime scene. I noticed something else that I missed the night before. An email from the bank, time-stamped early Christmas Eve, confirming a change in account access. I had not opened it then, probably buried under work emails and holiday spam. The change had been made while I was upstairs in my parents' house, answering messages from coworkers, wrapping gifts, trusting the walls around me. I exhaled slowly through my nose. This was not impulsive. This was coordinated. I opened my notes app and added the email to the timeline I started last night. Christmas Eve morning. Christmas Eve night. Christmas morning. Each line made the picture sharper. Dawn watched quietly, giving me space. When I finally set my phone down, she asked, "Do you want me here when you call?" I thought about it, then shook my head. "Not yet. I need to hear it clean." I stepped into the living room and closed the door halfway, creating a little pocket of privacy. My hands were steady when I dialed the number. That surprised me. A recorded voice thanked me for calling and wished me happy holidays. I almost laughed. When a representative came on, her voice was professional and calm, the kind of calm that does not assume anything. I explained the situation carefully, choosing words that stuck to facts. Unauthorized transfers. Access changes I did not make. A vehicle sold without my consent. I kept my tone level, because emotion could wait. The representative asked questions and I answered them. Dates, amounts. Confirmation that I had not shared my login. Confirmation that I did not approve any of it. She put me on a brief hold and I stared at the wall, listening to soft music that felt inappropriate in its cheerfulness. When she came back, her voice had changed just slightly, more focused. Based on what you are describing, she said, this may require an investigation. I am going to flag your account for review and temporarily restrict further transfers until we sort this out. Restrict further transfers. The words landed like a small, solid gift. I thanked her and ended the call, my heart thudding now, not with fear, but with the awareness that something had shifted. A line had been crossed back, not with yelling or tears, but with procedure. My phone buzzed immediately after, like my family had some sixth sense for movement. A text from my mother popped up. Did you call the bank? Please tell me you did not call the bank. I stared at the message, then turned the phone face down on the coffee table. I was done responding to questions framed like accusations. I went back to the kitchen and told Dawn what happened. She closed her eyes for a second and let out a breath. Good, she said. That is good. You protected yourself. Protected. That word felt foreign and right at the same time. The rest of the morning moved slowly. Dawn's husband came downstairs, wished me a Merry Christmas with a kind awkwardness that did not pry. They gave me space. I appreciated that more than anything. Around noon, my phone rang again. Nicole's name flashed across the screen. I let it go to voicemail. A second later, a text came through. All caps and panic. What did you do? The landlord is asking questions. Call me now. I stared at the message, then set the phone down again. I did not owe her immediacy. I did not owe her reassurance. That realization felt like setting down a heavy bag I had been carrying for years. An hour later, my father called. I let it ring. Another voicemail followed, his voice tight and controlled, anger clipped by something else. Rachel, this has gone far enough. You are embarrassing us. Fix this. Embarrassing. Not hurt. Not wrong. Embarrassing. The word clarified everything I still needed. Clarified. I listened to the voicemails once, then archived them. I was done letting his tone dictate my heartbeat. In the afternoon, I sat at Dawn's dining table with my laptop and pulled every document I could find related to my finances: car registration, insurance, titles. I checked what I had and what I did not. The Tesla title was missing. My chest tightened again. Of course it was. My parents had access to the file cabinet in my old room. They had time. I opened my email and searched for anything related to the sale. A confirmation from a local dealership popped up, dated Christmas Eve afternoon. My car. Sold. My name listed as the owner. A signature attached that made my skin crawl. It was my name, but not my hand. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, letting the reality land. They did not just pressure me, they impersonated me. They forged something or found a way around it, and either way, it was not small. I saved the email and added it to my growing file. My phone buzzed again. A new number this time. I let it ring. A voicemail followed, the voice unfamiliar and professional. This is Mark from the leasing office. We need to speak regarding the guarantor listed on the application. Guarantor listed. My breath caught. I listened to the message again. Guarantor listed. That meant they had already submitted paperwork with my name on it, signature or not. That meant the paper my father slid across the table was not a question. It was a formality they expected me to complete to cover their tracks. I closed my eyes and counted my breaths. In, out, slow. This was bigger than I thought, and at the same time, it made everything make sense. I returned the call, choosing my words with care. I explained that I had not agreed to act as a guarantor and that any application listing me was unauthorized. The man on the other end paused, then asked for documentation. I told him I would send it. When the call ended, I sat very still, feeling the weight of it all settle into my bones. They had put my name on something active, something with consequences that could follow me for years if I did not stop it now. Dawn found me there and did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "You are doing the right thing." I nodded, but inside, something else was happening. The last of the illusion was burning away. This was not about helping Nicole. This was about using me as a shield, a buffer, a solution that did not push back. My phone buzzed again. Nicole this time, her tone different now. Frantic. "Please," she wrote. "They are saying my approval might fall through. I cannot lose this. You always help me. Please. Always help me." The phrase felt like a confession she did not mean to make. I typed a reply, then deleted it. I typed another, then deleted that too. Anything I said right now would be twisted into obligation. Instead, I opened my notes app and wrote a single sentence for myself. Silence is not cruelty. It is a boundary. As evening settled in, Dawn asked if I wanted to stay another night. I said yes without hesitation. I was not ready to be alone yet, and I was not ready to choose my next move without sleep. I lay in the guest bed again, phone on the nightstand, the house quiet around me. Outside, someone laughed in the distance, a sound that felt oddly grounding. I stared at the ceiling and let the day replay, not with horror, but with assessment. They had already started something in my name. They had assumed my compliance would clean up their mess. They had underestimated how dangerous it was to force someone like me into a corner. My phone lit up one last time. A message from my mother, softer than the rest. "We never meant to hurt you. We thought you would understand." I turned the phone face down and closed my eyes. Understanding had cost me enough. Tomorrow I would stop reacting and start deciding, and they were not going to like what that looked like. Morning light slipped through the guest room curtains in a thin, pale line, and for a few seconds I forgot why my chest felt tight. Then my phone vibrated on the nightstand, and memory came back in a rush that left no room for doubt. I did not reach for it right away. I lay still and listened to the house settle, to the faint clatter of dishes downstairs, to Dawn humming to herself like this was just another ordinary day. Ordinary felt like a gift I did not deserve yet. When I finally picked up my phone, the screen was crowded. Missed calls, new messages, voicemails stacked like proof. The note I left had been found. My mother wrote first. "Rachel, what does this mean? Please call me. We are very worried." My father followed minutes later. "This is not funny. You need to come home and explain yourself." Nicole's messages came in bursts, short and sharp. "What did you do? Who did you talk to? Answer me." I read them without answering. The words skimmed over me now, no longer hooking into my guilt the way they used to. Something had changed overnight. Not in them, but in me. The note had done exactly what I intended. It did not accuse. It did not argue. It drew a line they could not pretend not to see. Dawn knocked softly and poked her head in. "Coffee is ready," she said. "You look like someone who slept with one eye open." I smiled a little at that and followed her to the kitchen. The warmth and smell of coffee grounded me, but my phone buzzed again as I sat down. I turned it face down and wrapped my hands around the mug. "They found the note," Dawn said gently. I nodded. "I can tell." She did not ask what it said. She did not need to. The effect was written all over my face. I thought back to the kitchen table at my parents' house, to the way I placed that single page in the center, to the calm in my chest as I wrote it. I had chosen every word carefully, not to explain myself, but to force a reaction. The note was not about my feelings. It was about consequences. It told them I had spoken to the bank, that I had reported the unauthorized transfers and the guarantor issue, and that they were not to sign or submit anything in my name again. Nothing else. No love. No apology. No room for negotiation. The silence after that kind of statement was the point. My phone buzzed again, this time a voicemail from my mother. I let it play on speaker while Dawn busied herself at the sink. Her voice sounded thinner than usual, stretched tight with something that was not just worry. "Rachel, please," she said. "Your father is very upset. The bank called. They are asking questions. This is getting serious. Getting serious." As if it had not been serious when they sold my car or emptied my savings. As if seriousness only existed when it turned back on them. I ended the message and stared into my coffee. Dawn shook her head slowly. "They are scared now," she said. "Yes," I said. "And they should be." The rest of the morning unfolded with the same pattern. A call from my father that I ignored. A text from Nicole that started with anger and ended with fear. They circled the same points over and over, trying to pull me back into the role of fixer, the one who smooths things over before anyone else has to face discomfort. What surprised me was how quickly their tone changed. Less than 24 hours ago, they had been issuing ultimatums. Now they were asking, demanding still, but threaded with panic. Control does that when it starts to slip. It shows its seams. Around midday, a new number popped up on my screen. I answered this one because it did not belong to any of them. "This is Karen from the bank," the woman said, professional and calm. "I am following up on your report. We have temporarily frozen the disputed amount and placed a hold on any applications listing you as a guarantor until the investigation is complete." I closed my eyes as relief washed through me, sharp and clean. "Thank you," I said. "There will be questions," she continued. "We will need documentation. But you did the right thing by contacting us promptly." After the call ended, I sat back and let myself feel it. Not triumph, not revenge, just safety. A thin layer of it, but real. My phone buzzed immediately after. Nicole this time, her message longer than before. "The bank called the landlord. They are saying my approval is on hold. Are you happy now? Do you know what this is doing to me?" I imagined her pacing her apartment, phone clutched in her hand, the future she thought she had secured suddenly wobbling. I imagined my parents sitting at the dining table again, Christmas decorations still up, the house trying desperately to look normal while everything underneath shifted. For the first time, I did not rush to respond. I did not type and delete. I let the message sit. Dawn glanced at my phone. "Your sister?" she asked. I nodded. "She is panicking." Dawn leaned against the counter and folded her arms. "That means she knows something is wrong." That thought stayed with me. Nicole's panic was not just about losing an apartment. It was about timing. It was about something fragile she had been counting on that I was never meant to touch. The more she pushed, the clearer it became that Christmas morning was not the beginning. It was the reveal. In the afternoon, my parents shifted tactics. My mother sent a message framed like concern. "We just want to talk. No arguing, no pressure. We love you." My father followed with a clipped edition. This can all be fixed if you stop escalating it. Escalating it. As if I had started something by refusing to be stolen from. I walked to the window and looked out at Dawn's quiet street. A woman walked her dog past the house, bundled in a scarf, her breath visible in the cold air. Somewhere down the block, someone laughed. Life went on, indifferent to my family's crisis. That normalcy steadied me. I thought about why the note had landed the way it did. It was not just because I involved the bank. It was because the note took away their favorite weapon, plausible deniability. They could no longer pretend this was a misunderstanding. They could no longer say I agreed or that I would come around. I had put my position in writing, and writing has weight. Late that afternoon, Nicole finally called again. I answered this time, not because I owed her, but because I wanted to hear her say it. "What did you tell the bank?" she demanded, skipping any greeting. I kept my voice even. I told them the truth. Her breath hitched. "You always do this," she snapped. "You make everything bigger than it needs to be. It was just a temporary thing." "Temporary for you," I said. "Permanent for me if something went wrong." She laughed, sharp and brittle. "You think you are so perfect. You always have been. You have the job, the car, the savings." This was finally my chance to catch up, and you could not stand it. The accusation slid off me. "If it was your chance," I said, "then why did it need my name?" There was a pause on the line, too long to be accidental. I heard her swallow. "You are being dramatic," she said, but the word lacked conviction. I lowered my voice. "You already submitted paperwork with my name on it," I said, "without my consent. That is not help. That is theft." She exploded then, words tumbling over each other. "You are ruining my life. Mom and Dad said you would sign. They promised. You always do. Why are you doing this now?" There it was. The assumption laid bare. You always do. I ended the call without another word. My phone buzzed almost immediately, but I set it down and did not look. Dawn watched me from the doorway, concern softening her face. "Are you okay?" she asked. I took a breath. "I am clearer," I said. "That feels better than okay." As evening approached, the messages changed again. My parents stopped asking and started apologizing, but the apologies were careful, conditional. "We are sorry this upset you. We never meant for it to go this far. You know we love you." The subtext was loud. "Stop. Fix it. Make this go away." I recognized the pattern now. They were trying to rewrite the story into one where everyone meant well, and I simply overreacted. If they could frame it that way, they could forgive themselves without changing anything. I refused to help them do that. Around dinner time, my father sent a message that crossed a line. "If you keep this up," he wrote, "you will regret it. You are hurting this family, and there will be consequences." I stared at the words until my pulse slowed. Threats were his last resort when authority failed. He did not know how to exist without control. I did not reply. Dawn ordered takeout, and we ate on the couch, the television on low. She did not push me to talk. That kindness felt like a balm. After dinner, I went back to the guest room and sat on the bed with my laptop. I organized the files I had been collecting. Screenshots, emails, voicemails, a clean timeline that told a simple story. Unauthorized access, unauthorized transfers, unauthorized use of my name. As I worked, another realization clicked into place. The note did more than scare them. It bought me time. While they scrambled, I could prepare. While they argued, I could document. Silence was not weakness. It was space. My phone buzzed again, a voicemail from my mother. This time, her voice broke. "Rachel, please," she said. "We did not think it would come to this. Your sister cannot sleep. Your father is furious. The bank is calling again tomorrow. Can we meet for coffee? Just us. Coffee. A neutral place. No witnesses. No paper trail. The request was careful. Strategic. I did not answer. I set the phone down and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. I felt tired, but not the bone-deep exhaustion of carrying other people's problems. This was a different tired, the kind that comes from focus. The note had worked, but it was only the opening move. I could see that now. They were reacting to fear, not understanding. And fear makes people sloppy. Tomorrow, I would stop waiting for them to make the next move. Tomorrow, I would start pulling on the threads they were so desperate to hide. I woke with a sense of purpose that surprised me, not the frantic edge of the last few days, but something steadier, like my feet had finally found the floor. The house was quiet again, Dawn already out running errands, the kind of trust that let me sit alone without feeling like a burden. I made coffee and stood at the sink, watching steam curl into the air, and I let myself think clearly for the first time since Christmas morning. The threads I planned to pull were not emotional ones. They were practical. Paperwork. Processes. People who answered to rules instead of family pressure. My parents had always relied on my reluctance to make things official. They believed love meant silence, and silence meant consent. Today, I would change that assumption without raising my voice. I opened my laptop and logged into the cloud drive where I kept old documents. Years of careful saving had trained me to keep records. Car payments, insurance renewals, employment contracts. I created a new folder and named it simply Evidence. The word felt clinical, and that was exactly what I needed. First, I called the dealership listed on the sale confirmation. I asked for the sales manager and waited, my fingers tracing the rim of my mug. When he came on, his tone was brisk, the voice of someone who handled problems by moving them along. I explained that a vehicle registered in my name had been sold without my consent, and that I needed copies of all documents related to the transaction. He hesitated, asked for verification, then sighed. He told me they would need to review the file. I told him I would wait. While he put me on hold, I stared out the window and thought about how many times I had been told to wait for my family. Wait until things calm down. Wait until it is a better time. Wait until your sister is settled. Waiting had always cost me something. Today, waiting would cost someone else. The manager came back and said they would send copies by end of day. His voice was careful now. I thanked him and ended the call. Next was the leasing office. I forwarded my earlier email stating I had not agreed to act as guarantor and requested confirmation that my name had been removed from the application. Their reply came quickly, polite and distant. They acknowledged the dispute and confirmed the application was on hold pending verification. On hold. Another small barrier placed between my life and their plans. My phone buzzed as I worked, but I did not check it. I knew who it would be, and I knew what they would say. Every minute I stayed focused made their noise feel farther away. By midday, the evidence folder had grown. Screenshots of account access changes, emails confirming transfers, voicemails transcribed into text, a clean timeline. I felt like I was building something solid, a wall they could not talk their way through. When my phone finally rang again, I answered because the name on the screen was familiar for a different reason. Mark, the leasing office contact. He sounded apologetic. We received additional paperwork this morning, he said. It appears there was an attempt to finalize the guarantor portion. Attempt. The word landed hard. I told him again, clearly, that any such attempt was unauthorized and that I would be submitting a formal written statement. He thanked me and said their legal team would handle it. Legal team. Another line drawn. After the call, I sat back and closed my eyes. My parents were not just scrambling. They were still trying to push things through, hoping speed would beat scrutiny. That realization did not scare me. It clarified the stakes. I checked my phone at last. Messages stacked up like they had before, but the tone had shifted again. Less anger. More bargaining. My mother asked if I could please meet her for coffee. My father wrote that this was all being blown out of proportion. Nicole sent a long message about stress and how unfair it was that her future was being put on hold. I read them all and did not respond. Instead, I called Grace. She answered on the second ring. "Tell me you are not alone," she said. I smiled despite myself. "I am okay. I just need to talk something through." We spoke for nearly an hour. I told her everything I had uncovered so far: the attempted paperwork, the dealership call, the pattern that was emerging. She listened without interrupting, the way she always did when she wanted to understand instead of fix. "They assumed you would cave," she said when I finished. "And when you did not, they tried to outrun the consequences." "Exactly." Grace was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know this is not just about the apartment, right?" I did. I just had not said it out loud yet. This was about control. About keeping me tethered in ways that looked helpful but functioned like chains. If I signed, if I stayed silent, if I fixed it, they would never stop. In the afternoon, my mother finally stopped texting and called instead. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. I wanted to hear her voice now, to measure the distance between us. "Rachel," she said, relief and fear tangled together. "Thank you for picking up. We need to talk." I kept my tone neutral. "You can talk." She rushed in then, words spilling out. "Your father is beside himself. The bank is asking for statements. Nicole is falling apart. This has gone too far." I let her speak until she ran out of breath. Then I said, "You sold my car and emptied my savings without permission. You changed my account access. You submitted paperwork with my name on it. That is not help. That is theft." She inhaled sharply. "We were desperate," she said. "We thought you would understand. You always do." The familiar phrase made my jaw tighten. "I understand that you assumed I would cover this," I said. "I do not understand why you thought you had the right." Silence stretched on the line. Then she said softly, "Can we meet? Just you and me. We can fix this." "Fix it how?" I asked. She hesitated. "We can talk to the bank. We can explain it was a misunderstanding. You can tell them you are okay with it." There it was, the ask wrapped in concern. "No," I said. "I am not okay with it. And I am not fixing this for you." Her voice broke. "Rachel, please. We are family." I took a breath. "Family does not take without asking," I said. "Family does not threaten housing to force signatures. Family does not use love as leverage." She started to cry then, the sound raw and real, and for a moment the old instinct surged in me, the urge to soothe, to take responsibility for her pain. I sat with it and let it pass. "I will not meet until the investigation is complete," I said. "And when I do, it will be with boundaries." The line went quiet. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller. "You are really doing this?" "Yes," I said. "I am." After I hung up, my hands trembled, not with fear, with the release of something I had been holding for years. I went for a walk to shake it off, pulling on a coat and stepping into the cold air. The neighborhood was calm, decorations still hanging from porches, lights blinking in daylight. I walked without a destination, letting the rhythm steady me. Halfway down the block, my phone buzzed again. "Nicole." I ignored it and kept walking. By the time I returned, my head felt clearer. I made tea and sat at the table again, opening my laptop to draft a formal statement for the bank. I wrote plainly, sticking to facts, attaching evidence. When I finished, I read it once, then sent it. The confirmation email arrived minutes later. Case number assigned. Next steps outlined. Professional. Impersonal. Exactly what I needed. Evening fell early, the sky darkening before dinner. Dawn returned and listened as I told her about the calls. She did not try to soften it. She said, "They are realizing you are serious." I nodded. "And they are not done trying." We ate together, quiet and comfortable. Afterward, I retreated to the guest room again and checked my phone. A new voicemail from my father waited. I listened once. "Rachel," his voice said, controlled but strained. "This ends now. You will meet us tomorrow, and we will resolve this. Or you will not be welcome here again." I stared at the wall as the message ended. The threat was familiar. The final card he always played. Home as a reward. Exile as punishment. For the first time, it did not work. I saved the voicemail and added it to the folder. As I lay in bed that night, the house quiet around me, I felt something settle into place. They were escalating, but so was the truth. Every push from them added weight to my case, not theirs. Tomorrow would bring another attempt, another angle, another plea. I would be ready. Because now I understood the shape of what they had built around me, and I knew exactly where to press to make it crack. The first thing I did after waking was open the evidence folder again, not because I needed to add anything, but because I needed to see it laid out clean and undeniable. Screenshots, dates, voicemails. Every attempt to corner me preserved in black and white. It grounded me, reminded me that this was not a feeling problem. It was a pattern problem. My phone buzzed before I finished my coffee. A number I recognized but had not saved flashed on the screen. My grandmother. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" Her voice came through warm but edged with concern. "Rachel, sweetheart, are you all right?" I closed my eyes. "I am," I said. "I am safe." There was a pause, the kind that meant she was choosing her words. "Your mother called me last night," she said. "She was very upset." Of course she was. I waited. "She told me there has been a misunderstanding," my grandmother continued, "that things got out of hand. She said you are being very stubborn." I almost smiled at that. Stubborn was the family's polite word for disobedient. I took a breath. "Grandma, they sold my car and emptied my savings without permission. They tried to put me on a legal document without my consent." Silence crackled on the line. When my grandmother spoke again, her voice was quieter. "They did what?" I repeated it, slowly, calmly. I could hear the shift in her breathing as the pieces fell into place. "Oh," she said finally. "Oh no." She did not defend them. She did not minimize it. That small mercy meant more than I expected. "Your mother did not tell me that part," she said. I imagined my mother choosing her words carefully, framing herself as worried, as confused, as blindsided by my reaction. I felt tired, but not angry. "I am not trying to hurt them," I said. "I am trying to protect myself." My grandmother sighed. "You always were the responsible one," she said. "Maybe too responsible." That landed with a strange mix of comfort and sadness. I had worn that label my whole life, like a badge and a leash. "I love you," she said. "Whatever you decide, I love you." I swallowed. "I love you too." After the call, I sat for a long time, thinking about how quickly the story changed once it reached someone outside the immediate circle. The truth did not need drama to be effective. It just needed light. By late morning, my parents tried again. This time together. A group text, as if unity would make it stronger. "We need to meet today. This cannot wait. Please respond." I typed a reply, then deleted it. I typed another. Deleted that too. Any response would be an opening. I was done opening doors. Instead, I forwarded my grandmother a brief message with the facts and the case number, not to enlist her, but to anchor the truth somewhere it could not be twisted. Then I put my phone on silent. Dawn left for work around noon, hugging me before she went. "You are doing great," she said. "Call me if you need anything." I promised I would and meant it. The afternoon was quiet, and in that quiet, memories started surfacing, uninvited. Not dramatic scenes, just small moments stitched together into a pattern I had never fully acknowledged. Being asked to cover a bill here, a deposit there, being told how lucky my sister was to have me, being praised for being easy, for understanding, for not making things harder. I realized something then that made my chest ache. They did not just rely on me financially, they relied on me emotionally to absorb discomfort so they would not have to. My phone buzzed despite being on silent, vibrating against the table like a trapped insect. I glanced at the screen. Nicole again. A voicemail this time. I let it play later, when I was ready. Her voice was different now, rawer. "Rachel, please," she said. "I know you are mad, but this is ruining everything. I cannot lose this apartment. I already told people. I already paid for movers. You are doing this on purpose. Doing this on purpose." The accusation hung in the air. I listened again, not to respond, but to understand. Her fear was real. So was her entitlement. They existed side by side, tangled so tightly she could not tell them apart. I did not call her back. Later that afternoon, an email arrived from the dealership. Attached were scanned documents from the sale. My name printed. A signature that mimicked mine well enough to pass a cursory glance. My stomach clenched. I forwarded the email to the bank investigator and added a note. "Attached are documents from the unauthorized sale of my vehicle. The signature is not mine." Sending it felt like stepping onto solid ground. My phone rang again shortly after. The bank this time. Karen's voice was steady. "We received the additional documentation," she said. "This strengthens your report." Strengthens? Another word that mattered. She explained next steps, timelines, what to expect. It was all process, no emotion, and I clung to that. When we hung up, I felt lighter. Not because it was over, but because it was no longer vague. As evening approached, the tone from my parents shifted yet again. My mother sent a message that made my chest tighten. "Your father is beside himself. This is affecting his work. People are asking questions. Is that what you want?" There it was. Reputation. The currency they valued most. I stared at the message and felt a strange calm. I did not want their downfall. I wanted accountability. If those two things overlapped, that was not my doing. I replied for the first time that day. "I want my name cleared and my boundaries respected." Nothing more. The reply came quickly. "This is tearing the family apart." I set the phone down and walked to the window, watching the sky fade from gray to deep blue. The phrase echoed in my mind, tearing the family apart. As if the family had been whole before this. As if my silence had not been holding together something already cracked. I thought about my father's threat from last night. Not welcome here again. The words no longer scared me. Home had stopped being a place the moment it became conditional. My phone buzzed again. A message from my mother. Softer. "We are just asking for one conversation. Please." I did not respond. Instead, I opened my notes app and wrote out what I would say if I did meet them, not to send, but to clarify my own mind. I wrote about consent, about trust, about the difference between help and coercion. I wrote until the words stopped shaking. By the time I finished, the house was dark and quiet again. Dawn texted to check in. I told her I was okay and meant it. I lay in bed later, listening to the familiar sounds of a house settling, and felt the weight of everything press in. Not panic. Grief. Grief for the version of my parents I had believed in. Grief for the sister I wished I had. grief for the years I spent mistaking responsibility for love. My phone lit up one last time, a message from my father. "This is your final warning. Choose carefully." I stared at it until the screen dimmed. I had already chosen. I just had not told them yet. As sleep finally crept in, slow and reluctant, I understood something with painful clarity. The hardest part was not going to be proving what they did. It was going to be standing firm when they realized they could not make me fix it, and decided to make me the villain instead. That was coming next. The morning did not bring the explosion I had been bracing for. It brought something quieter and more dangerous. Silence. No calls, no messages, no frantic demands. My phone sat still on the nightstand like it had decided to behave. I lay there watching the light creep across the ceiling, understanding exactly what that meant. They were regrouping. Silence had always been my parents' favorite tactic when anger failed. It was how they reminded you that connection was conditional. Speak when spoken to. Apologize first. Come back smaller. I had lived inside that rhythm my whole life, so I recognized it instantly. I got up anyway and moved through the morning like someone rehearsing a new role. Coffee, shower, clean clothes. Each small decision felt deliberate. I was no longer reacting. I was preparing. When I checked my phone again after breakfast, there was one new notification. A calendar invite. From my mother. Coffee tomorrow morning. The same cafe she always chose when she wanted to appear reasonable. Neutral ground, warm lighting, soft music. No witnesses who mattered. I stared at the screen and felt the familiar pull of obligation rise up, then settle back down. I did not accept. I did not decline. I let it sit. Instead, I called Logan. He picked up on the second ring. "You sound awake," he said. "That is either very good or very bad." "Probably both," I said. "I think they are about to flip the story." He exhaled like he had been expecting that. When people lose control privately, they look for an audience publicly. That sentence stuck with me. Logan had been my friend since before I learned how useful I was to my family. He had seen the long hours, the skipped vacations, the way I always answered when my phone rang. When I told him everything over the last few days, he had not reacted with shock so much as confirmation. "What do you want to do next?" he asked. I thought about it. "I want to stay ahead of them," I said. "I want facts to exist somewhere they cannot erase." "Then tell your side first," he said gently. "Not emotionally, just truthfully." I hesitated. The idea made my stomach twist. I had been raised to keep family business private, to protect the image even when it hurt. But I could already feel how quickly that rule was being used against me. I thanked him and hung up, the thought lingering. By early afternoon, the silence broke. My phone buzzed with a notification from a cousin I barely spoke to anymore. "Are you okay?" I saw Nicole's post. Post. My chest tightened. I opened the app slowly, bracing myself. There it was. A photo of my parents and Nicole in front of the Christmas tree. Smiles wide, arms linked, the caption carefully written. "Some people forget what family means. Grateful for those who stayed." Stayed. The word burned. The comments were already piling up. Heart emojis, praise, family first. "You are so strong. Ignore the negativity." Negativity. That was me now. Reduced to a vague absence, a problem unnamed but implied. I scrolled further and saw Nicole reply to someone. "Real family shows up when it matters. Not when money is involved." I laughed out loud, a sharp sound that startled me. Money was the only reason any of this existed. They had emptied my savings and sold my car, and now they were framing me as the one who walked away over money. The speed of it stunned me. How quickly they had decided who the villain was, how easily they painted themselves as wounded. My phone buzzed again. Messages from cousins, old friends, People who had only ever heard my parents' version of me. Is everything okay? What happened? Nicole says you left them stranded. Stranded. As if they had not drained me first. I set the phone down and paced the room. Anger flared, hot and tempting. I could fire back immediately. I could comment. I could post screenshots and burn the whole thing down. The impulse was strong, but Logan's words echoed. Facts, not emotion. I sat at the desk and opened my laptop. I created a new account on a forum I knew well, one that thrived on messy truths and long stories. I kept everything anonymous. No names, no locations, just events. I wrote slowly, carefully, laying it out in order. Christmas morning, the car, the savings, the ultimatum, the note, the bank investigation. I included nothing I could not prove. I ended with a simple question. If this were you, would you stay quiet or let the consequences happen? When I hit post, my hand trembled. Not with fear, with release. I did not refresh right away. I stood up, walked to the window, and watched people pass on the street below. Ordinary lives moving through ordinary days. I reminded myself that telling the truth was not an attack. When I finally checked back, responses were already coming in. Dozens, then hundreds. People were blunt, unsentimental, validating in a way that felt strange. They called the behavior theft, manipulation, emotional abuse. They called the sister entitled. They called the parents reckless. And over again, they told me to protect myself. I closed the laptop and let the words sink in. It was not about being believed. It was about no longer being alone inside the story. My phone buzzed almost immediately after, Nicole this time, her message exploding across the screen. What did you post? People are sending me screenshots. Take it down now. I did not respond. Another message followed. You are humiliating us. Mom is crying. Dad is furious. I stared at the words and felt something settle in my chest. They were not upset that I was hurt. They were upset that the story no longer belonged to them. The messages kept coming. My mother. Your father's clients are asking questions. This is serious. My father. You are destroying this family. Destroying. The word felt heavy and false. I replied once, carefully. I did not post names or lies. I told the truth. The typing bubbles appeared, vanished, appeared again. Then nothing. That evening, Grace came over with groceries and wine and zero patience for nonsense. She read the post, read the comments, then looked up at me. They thought they could control the narrative because you always stayed quiet, she said. They did not expect you to speak. I nodded. I did not expect it either. We sat on the couch, the room dim, the television muted. My phone lit up again and again, but I ignored it. For the first time, I felt protected by distance instead of punished by it. Later, after Grace left, I checked my messages. A new one stood out. My father. Take down whatever you wrote. This is your last chance. If you keep pushing this, do not bother coming back. The words should have hurt. Instead, they clarified something I had been circling for days. He did not care what he had done. He cared that people were starting to see it. I saved the message. I went to bed that night knowing I had crossed a line I could not uncross. And for the first time, that did not feel like a mistake. The internet does not forget easily. Stories spread faster than apologies. I knew that by morning things would be worse for them and clearer for me. I closed my eyes and let the quiet settle, aware that the next move would not come from me. They were about to learn what happens when control turns into exposure. The drive out of town felt like a slow exhale I did not know I had been holding. Grace sat behind the wheel, focused and calm, the radio low, the road stretching ahead of us like permission. I watched the houses thin out, The storefronts give way to trees, and with every mile, the noise in my head softened just enough to breathe. We had booked the cabin on impulse, a last-minute decision made over coffee and frustration. "You need distance," Grace had said, "and somewhere quiet to think." She was right. The internet was loud, my phone was loud, my family was louder. I needed a place where none of them could reach me without effort. The cabin sat at the edge of a small clearing, wood dark against the pale winter sky. It was simple and clean, the kind of place meant for rest, not drama. As soon as I stepped inside, the smell of pine and cold air wrapped around me, grounding in a way nothing else had been for days. We dropped our bags and stood there for a moment just listening. No traffic, no neighbors, just wind moving through trees. "This is good," Grace said quietly. I nodded. It was. The first thing I did was turn my phone off. Not silent. Off. The screen went dark, and with it, the constant tug of other people's needs disappeared. My chest loosened in response, a physical reaction I had not expected. That night, we cooked something simple and ate by the fireplace. Grace talked about work, about nothing that mattered in the grand scheme, and I listened, grateful for the normalcy. When the conversation slowed, she looked at me over her glass. "What do you want to happen next?" she asked. The question was gentle, not loaded, and it landed deeper than anything my family had asked. I stared into the fire and let myself answer honestly. "I want them to stop," I said. "I want them to understand that I am not their backup plan anymore, and I want my name clear. That is it." "Not punishment," Grace said. "Consequences." Exactly. Later, alone in the small bedroom, I turned my phone back on just long enough to check messages. The screen filled instantly. Missed calls, texts, notifications from the forum where my post had exploded overnight. Thousands of comments, reactions, videos, people stitching my words into their own stories. I felt a flash of panic, then pushed it down. I had told the truth. What happened next was not mine to control. One message stood out among the rest. From Nicole. "What did you tell the bank?" "They are saying there is an investigation. My loan is on hold. Fix this." The command felt familiar and empty. I typed a reply, erased it, then typed again. "I told them what happened," I wrote. "That is all." Her response came seconds later. "You are ruining my life. You are doing this out of jealousy. You always hated that Mom and Dad tried to help me." Jealousy. The accusation was almost comforting in its predictability. It meant she still did not understand. And maybe never would. I did not reply. The next morning, the cabin was bright with winter sun, light bouncing off snow and bare branches. Grace made coffee while I stood on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, breathing air that felt sharp and clean. For a moment, my problems felt far away, manageable, like something I could set down and pick up later. That peace lasted until I checked my phone again. Messages from my mother filled the screen, longer now, frantic. Someone sent her my post. She demanded to know if I had written it. She accused me of trying to humiliate them. She begged me to take it down. I stared at the words and felt the old guilt rise up, the reflex to soothe, to explain, to make it better. I let it pass. Grace came out beside me and read the messages over my shoulder. "They are scared," she said, "and angry." "Both," I said, "and neither because they hurt me." Around noon, my father finally called. I watched the phone ring until it stopped, then listened to the voicemail through the speaker, my ear pressed close. "Rachel," his voice said, tight and controlled. "This has gone far enough. You are embarrassing this family. People are whispering. The bank is talking about fraud. Take down whatever you posted and call the bank. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. We will handle this internally. If you keep pushing, Do not bother coming back here at all. I sat very still as the message ended. The threat was familiar. The intention was clear. He wanted control restored. He wanted silence. I turned to Grace, who had listened without comment. He does not care that he hurt me, I said quietly. He cares that people might find out. She nodded. That tells you everything. The rest of the day passed in a strange calm. We hiked a trail behind the cabin, our boots crunching on frozen ground, our breath visible in the cold. I laughed at something stupid Grace said, and realized it was the first real laugh I had had since Christmas. The sound surprised me. That night, alone again, I opened my notes app and wrote something I had never written before. A list of boundaries. Clear. Non-negotiable. No more signing anything. No loans. No temporary help framed as family obligation. No silence in exchange for peace. If they wanted a relationship, it would be on terms that respected me as a person, not a resource. I stared at the list and felt something solid settle into place. This was not revenge. This was clarity. The next morning, as we packed up to leave the cabin, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I answered, curiosity outweighing caution. Rachel, a woman said, this is Karen from the bank. I wanted to update you. I leaned against the counter, heart thudding. They had moved quickly, she explained. The disputed funds were frozen pending investigation. Any loan application listing me as guarantor was flagged. The sale of my vehicle was under review. Formal inquiries had been opened. In simple terms, everything my family had rushed to secure was now stalled. I thanked her and ended the call, my hands shaking slightly. Not with fear. With the understanding that the shape of my revenge was becoming clear, and it did not involve yelling or confrontation. It involved systems, procedures, time. Grace looked at me expectantly. Well, it is working, I said. We drove back down the mountain in silence, the road winding through trees and rock. My phone buzzed nonstop, but I did not check it. I did not need to. By the time we reached the edge of town, I felt ready for whatever came next. I knew my parents would demand a meeting. I knew Nicole would escalate. I knew the narrative war would continue. But for the first time, I also knew this. They no longer had the power to force my hand. And soon, they were going to find out just how much they had been relying on me to keep everything standing. When I got back to town, the streets looked the same. The same tired decorations drooping on porch rails, the same grocery store sign blinking in the cold, but I felt like I had returned as a different person. Grace dropped me at Dawn's place, hugged me tight at the door, and said one last thing before she left. Do not go into a room with them unless you know what you want, she said. Not what they want. What you want. I nodded because I had written it down and because I could feel it in my bones now. I wanted my name clear, my money protected, my boundaries respected. Anything else was optional. Dawn greeted me with a look that mixed relief and worry. You were gone 2 nights, she said. I almost drove up there. I smiled faintly. I am sorry. I just needed air. She nodded like she understood, then said, Your mom came by yesterday. My stomach tightened. She did what? She did not come inside, Dawn said. She stood on the porch and cried and asked me to tell you to call her. I told her you were safe and that I was not getting in the middle. She did not like that. Of course she did not. Dawn touched my shoulder. You are still okay with staying here, right? I mean, you do not have to, but you can. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Thank you, I said. I am okay. I just need to keep my head. That evening, my phone buzzed with a new message from my mother. Not a text this time. An email. Subject line, please, just us. The words inside were careful and soft. She asked for coffee. Just me and her. No yelling, no arguing, no pressure. She said she missed me. She said my father was upset, but that he loved me. She said Nicole was terrified. She said she was scared the bank would escalate things. She asked if we could meet tomorrow morning at the cafe by the library. She did not mention the car. She did not mention the savings. She did not mention the forged signature. She wrote as if the real problem was that the family was stressed. I stared at the email for a long time, then forwarded it to myself and added it to my folder. Even the soft messages were evidence now. I did not reply immediately. I sat with the decision until my breathing slowed. Grace's voice echoed. Do not go into a room with them unless you know what you want. I knew. So I responded with a single line. Tomorrow at 10. I will stay for 30 minutes. Nothing more. My mother replied within minutes. Thank you. I love you. I did not answer that part. Love without respect was just a word my family used to cover everything else. The next morning, I left Dawn's house with my phone fully charged and my coat zipped to my chin. The sky was pale, the air sharp enough to sting. I tucked my phone into my pocket and, before I got in the car, opened the voice recorder app and hit record. Then I slid the phone into my inner jacket pocket where it would pick up everything. I was not doing it to trap my mother. I was doing it because my mother's version of events had already started traveling without me, and I needed the truth preserved somewhere that did not rely on anyone's memory. The cafe by the library was the kind of place that pretended to be cozy, soft lighting, seasonal chalkboard art, cinnamon in the air. My mother had chosen it because it made her look like the reasonable one. She was already there, seated at a corner table, hands wrapped around a mug she was not drinking. Her hair looked done, her makeup careful, but her eyes were swollen like she had cried too much. When she saw me, she stood halfway, uncertain, like she was not sure if she had the right to touch me. Rachel, she whispered. You look tired. I sat across from her. I wonder why, I said. Her mouth trembled. I did not mean it like that. I meant, you have been through a lot. I let that sit. I did not soften it for her. A server came over. I ordered tea because coffee would make my hands shake. My mother watched me like I might disappear. When the server left, my mother reached for my hand, then pulled back. We need to talk about what happened, she said. We need to fix this. Do not call it fix, I replied. Call it what it is. Her eyes filled immediately. Sweetheart, she said, we never wanted to hurt you. You did, I said quietly. On purpose. Her face flinched. No, she whispered. We did not think of it that way. We were desperate. Nicole needed help. The market is insane. Her landlord was pressuring her. She was going to lose the place. So you took my money, I said. And you sold my car. She swallowed hard. We thought you would understand. You always do. There it was again. The phrase that had been used like a key for years. You always do. It was how they justified skipping my consent. It was how they turned my compliance into a personality trait. I leaned forward slightly. Mom, I said, did you log into my bank account? Her eyes flicked away. Rachel, did you log into my bank account? I repeated. Her breath caught. Your father, she began. I did not ask about Dad, I said. I asked about you. Silence stretched between us. The cafe noise filled it. Cups clinking. Someone laughing. A milk steamer hissing. My mother's hands tightened around her mug. Yes, she whispered. We did. We used your savings to help Nicole. My jaw tightened. Did you change my password? Her eyes squeezed shut. Yes. Did you authorize the sale of my vehicle? She opened her eyes and looked at me like she wanted me to stop asking. Your father handled that part, she said. So yes, I said. You let it happen. She nodded once, almost imperceptible. I sat back and felt a cold steadiness settle in. Thank you, I said softly. Her eyes widened. Thank you. Now you have said it out loud, I replied. That matters. She shook her head, tears spilling. Rachel, please. The bank called your father. They froze the money. They are asking questions. They are talking about fraud. Do you really want to drag your own parents into legal trouble? The way she said parents made it sound like I was kicking puppies, not responding to theft. I kept my voice even. I did not drag you anywhere, I said. You walked there when you did this. I just stopped pretending it was normal. My mother's face crumpled. Nicole's apartment is falling apart, she said. The landlord wants proof. She already told people. She already ordered furniture. She is terrified. My tea arrived. I thanked the server and wrapped my hands around the cup, letting the warmth steady me. I looked at my mother and said, You are worried about her furniture. Her voice cracked. I am worried about all of us, she said quickly, about our family, about what people are saying. That post, the videos, Rachel, it is humiliating. Your father has clients asking questions. People are whispering. There it was. Not my pain, not my safety, the whispering. I let a small silence pass, long enough for her to hear herself. Then I said, You want me to call the bank and tell them it was a misunderstanding? She nodded, desperate. Please. Please, sweetheart, we will pay you back. We will make it right. Just help us stop this. I stared at her. The promises felt familiar, like a script. We will pay you back. We will make it right. Words that meant nothing without action. I took a breath. If you want me to consider anything, I said, you will do one thing first. Her eyes latched onto me. Anything, she whispered. I leaned in. You will send the bank investigator a statement, I said. In writing. From you. Saying exactly what you just admitted. That you accessed my account without consent. That you changed my password. That you transferred funds out. That you agreed to the sale of my car without my permission. Her face went white. No, she whispered. Rachel, no. That would destroy your father. I blinked slowly. So you are asking me to lie to protect him, I said. She shook her head frantically. I am asking you to save us. Please. We were desperate. We thought you would forgive us like you always do. Forgive is not the same thing as erase, I said. Her breath hitched. I am your mother, she whispered. And I am your daughter, I replied. And you treated me like a bank account. The words landed heavy between us. My mother's eyes filled again. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. For a moment, I felt the ache of it. I had wanted her to choose me for so long, to see me, to protect me. But the longing did not change the facts. I stood slowly. I told you I would stay 30 minutes, I said. We are done. Her hands flew up. Wait, she begged. Rachel, please, do not do this. Do not let the bank ruin us. Do not let Nicole lose everything. I looked down at her. Mom, I said, I am not ruining you. Your choices are catching up. That is all. I turned to leave. She stood quickly, chair scraping. Rachel, she said, voice trembling. If you keep pushing, your father will never forgive you. I paused with my hand on my coat pocket, feeling the recorder there, capturing everything. I looked back at her and said, I am not doing this for forgiveness. I am doing this for safety. Then I walked out into the cold air, the sting of it sharp against my cheeks. My heart hammered, not from fear, but from the finality of it. The cafe door closed behind me with a soft chime, and I stood for a moment on the sidewalk, breathing, letting the noise of the street wash over me. My phone buzzed in my pocket immediately. Nicole. I did not answer. Not yet. I started the car, hands steady on the wheel, and drove away, Knowing the meeting had not fixed anything, but it had given me something better. It had given me proof, and it had shown me exactly what my mother was willing to sacrifice to keep the family looking whole. Now it was my turn to decide what came next. The confirmation did not arrive with drama. It came as a short email that looked like every other email I had received from the bank so far. Clean subject line, neutral language, no emotion attached. I was standing in Dawn's kitchen, rinsing a mug, when my phone vibrated against the counter. I dried my hands slowly before picking it up, already knowing what it would say. Regarding your report, the email began. After preliminary review, we have determined that the disputed transactions and associated authorizations were not executed with your consent. Effective immediately, the transfers will be reversed, the guarantor listing voided, and the related accounts flagged for further internal action. That was it. No apology, no reassurance, just confirmation. I read it twice, then a third time, letting the words settle into my body. Reversed, voided, flagged. Each one felt like a door closing behind me, not trapping me, but protecting me. I set the phone down and leaned against the counter, eyes closed, breathing through the strange mix of relief and exhaustion flooding my chest. This was the moment everything tipped, and it happened without raised voices or slammed doors. It happened because systems do not care about guilt or family narratives. They care about authorization. My phone buzzed again almost immediately. This time it was not an email, it was a call. I did not answer. The second call came seconds later, then a third. I let them ring while I finished my coffee, while I stared out the window at a street that looked no different than it had an hour ago. Somewhere, my parents were discovering that the ground had given way beneath their feet, and I was not going to cushion the fall. When I finally checked my messages, they had stacked up in a neat row of panic. My mother first. The bank called your father. They froze everything. What did you do? Then my father. This ends now. Call me immediately. Then Nicole. What the hell did you tell them? My apartment is gone. The landlord canceled everything. Fix this now. I read them without responding, my heart steady in a way that surprised me. The fear I expected was not there. Neither was triumph. Just clarity. An hour later, another email arrived from the bank, this one addressed to all parties involved. Formal. Cold. It outlined next steps, investigations, and potential consequences for unauthorized access. It did not use the word fraud, but it did not need to. The implication hung heavy between the lines. That was when the calls changed. My father called again, and this time I answered. Rachel, he snapped the second I said hello. What have you done? I kept my voice even. I told the truth. You have no idea what you have caused, he barked. The bank is asking questions. They are reversing the money. The guarantor is void. Nicole's apartment fell through. Yes, I said. I know. There was a sharp inhale on the other end. Do you understand how serious this is? They are talking about escalation, about legal exposure. I leaned back against the counter. You should have thought about that before you touched my account, I said. Silence crackled between us. Then his voice dropped, colder. You could have handled this internally. Internally? I repeated. You mean quietly? He did not answer that. Rachel, he said finally, trying a different angle. You are hurting this family. I closed my eyes. You hurt this family when you decided my consent did not matter, I said. I am just not covering it anymore. He scoffed. You always take things too far. No, I said. This is as far as it goes. He started to say something else, something sharp and familiar, but I ended the call before he could finish. My hand did not shake when I set the phone down. Minutes later, Nicole called. I ignored it. She left a voicemail, her voice frantic and cracking. "You ruined everything," she cried. "I told everyone I was moving. I bought furniture, I gave notice. They canceled it. I do not have a place now. How could you do this to me?" I listened once, then archived it. Her panic was real. So were her assumptions. That afternoon, my mother texted, "Can we please meet? This is getting out of control." Out of control. The phrase almost made me laugh. Control was the only thing they cared about, and now they did not have it. I did not reply. Instead, I opened my laptop and forwarded the confirmation email to a secure folder, along with the recording from the cafe and the dealership documents. Everything connected now, a clean line from cause to effect. By evening, the fallout had spread wider. A cousin messaged to ask if the rumors were true. A family friend sent a vague note about hoping everything was okay. Someone had connected dots. Whispers my mother feared had begun. Dawn came home and found me sitting quietly on the couch, phone face down beside me. "It happened, did it not?" she asked. I nodded. "The bank reversed everything." She let out a long breath. "I am proud of you." That simple statement landed deeper than any apology I had ever been offered. Later that night, my mother called again. I answered this time, not because I owed her, but because I wanted to hear the shift. "Rachel," she said, her voice unsteady, "the bank says the money is coming back to you. They are asking for statements. They are asking about the car. This is spiraling." I waited. "Your father is beside himself," she continued. "Nicole is hysterical. She does not know where she is going to live now." I took a breath. "Mom," I said, "this is not spiraling. This is settling." She sobbed softly. "We never thought you would do this." "That is the problem," I replied. "You never thought I would stop you." Her voice sharpened with fear. "What do you want?" The question had weight now. It was no longer rhetorical. "I want my money returned," I said, "which is already happening. I want my name cleared, which is in process. And I want you to understand that I am not fixing this for you." She whispered my name like a plea. I continued, "You made decisions without me. Now you live with the consequences. That does not mean I hate you. It means I am done sacrificing myself to make things easier for you." Silence stretched between us. Then she said quietly, "Your sister says you are enjoying this?" I almost smiled. "I am not enjoying it," I said. "I am relieved." The call ended without resolution, and for the first time, that did not feel unfinished. Over the next 2 days, the consequences unfolded like a slow domino chain. Nicole's apartment was officially canceled. The deposit became a dispute between her and the landlord. My parents' finances were scrutinized. The dealership flagged the sale. Questions were asked that could not be smoothed over with charm or tears. I did nothing. I answered emails when required. I forwarded documents. I did not intervene. Grace called to check in. Logan texted a single line, "Proud of you." At night, alone in the guest room, I lay awake thinking about how quiet everything inside me felt. I had expected guilt. I had expected regret. What I felt instead was space. A few days later, my mother texted again. "Can we talk?" Not about fixing it. Just to talk. I stared at the message for a long time, then typed a reply I had rehearsed in my head. "We can talk after everything is resolved, and only if we are honest." She did not answer right away. When she finally did, it was just one word. "Okay." I set the phone down and exhaled, knowing the real battle was over. What remained was fallout, adjustment, and a family learning how to exist without using me as the foundation. I did not know what our relationship would look like after this, or if it would exist at all. But I knew something with absolute certainty. The document that ended it all was not the bank email or the voided guarantor. It was the quiet decision I made when I stopped protecting people who never protected me, and nothing they said next could undo that. The days that followed felt oddly quiet, like the world had decided to move on while my family stayed frozen in place. I woke each morning in Dawn's guest room and listened to the ordinary sounds of a house starting its day: footsteps, water running, a radio murmuring somewhere, and I noticed how my body no longer flinched at the sound of my phone. When I checked it now, there were fewer messages. Not because they had stopped caring, but because they had run out of ways to make me bend. The bank emails continued, formal and measured. Timelines, requests for clarification, notices that things were under review. Each one chipped away at the illusion that this could be smoothed over with apologies and promises. Systems had taken over, and systems did not care about who cried the loudest. I felt calm in a way that scared me a little. Calm had never been my role in this family. I had been the fixer, the one who stepped in before consequences landed. Without that job, there was space, and in that space came a strange grief. I grieved the parents I thought I had, the ones who would never put me in this position. I grieved the sister I kept hoping would grow up and see me as more than a resource. I grieved the version of myself who believed love meant endurance. That grief did not come all at once. It arrived in small waves, while folding laundry, while waiting for the kettle to boil, while passing a car like the one I used to drive, and feeling a brief, sharp pang before it faded. Nicole stopped calling after her last voicemail went unanswered. Instead, she texted in fragments, anger giving way to something quieter. "I do not know what I am supposed to do now," she wrote one evening. I stared at the message for a long time. In the past, that sentence would have pulled me in immediately. I would have offered solutions, money, reassurance. This time, I felt the boundary hold. "I do not answer right away anymore," I typed. And I did not. My parents tried again, separately this time, each reaching out in their own way. My father sent a message that was almost polite. "We need to discuss what happens next. There are things that cannot be undone." I thought about the things that could not be undone and felt a quiet acceptance settle in. That was the point. My mother's messages came late at night, softer and more confusing. She wrote about missing me, about how strange the house felt without my car in the driveway, about how she never imagined things would turn out like this. She did not apologize for the choices she made. She mourned the discomfort of their consequences. I began to see the pattern clearly. They regretted the fallout, not the betrayal. That realization hurt, but it also freed me from waiting for something that would never come. One afternoon, Dawn and I sat at the kitchen table, sunlight stretching across the floor, and she asked gently, "How are you holding up, really?" I considered the question. "I am sad," I said, "but I am not confused anymore." She smiled at that. "Clarity does that," she said. "It hurts, but it holds." I went back to work the following week, easing into routines that had nothing to do with family drama. Meetings, deadlines, coffee breaks where no one asked me to solve their lives. The normalcy grounded me. Logan stopped by my desk one afternoon and leaned against the partition. "You look different," he said. "How so?" "Like someone who stopped apologizing for taking up space." I laughed quietly. It felt good to laugh. Not all of the fallout was internal. Stories continued to circulate in small ways. A friend mentioned hearing something vague at a dinner party. A cousin asked again if I was okay, this time with an edge of concern instead of curiosity. My parents' carefully curated image had developed cracks, and people noticed. I did not correct rumors or defend myself publicly. The truth existed where it mattered, in official channels, in documents, in recordings. I did not need to shout it to feel secure. One evening, my mother called again. I answered, not because I expected resolution, but because I wanted to hear where she was now. Her voice sounded tired, stripped of the urgency that had defined the last weeks. "Rachel," she said, "I just wanted to check in." I waited. "Your father is struggling," she continued. "He feels like everything he built is being questioned." I thought about the things he built on top of my silence. "I am sorry he feels that way," I said. She sighed. "Nicole is staying with us for now. She is angry. At you. At us. At everyone." "That sounds like a lot," I said. "It is," she replied. And then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "The house feels different." "Different how?" I asked. "Quieter," she said. "Less stable." I let that sit. I could hear in her voice the realization that something essential had shifted. Not just financially, but structurally. The family dynamic they relied on no longer existed. "I am not coming back to fix that," I said gently. She was quiet for a long time. "I know," she said finally. "I think I am starting to understand that." The admission was small and late, but it mattered. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed and felt the ache of it all. Understanding did not erase harm. It did not restore trust. But it marked the end of denial. Over the next days, I noticed how often my instinct still tried to reach for responsibility that was not mine. A tense message from my father. A panicked text from Nicole. Each time, I paused, asked myself what I actually owed, and chose silence or simplicity. That practice felt like learning to walk again, awkward at first, then steadier. I wrote a message to myself and kept it in my notes. "You can care without rescuing. You can love without sacrificing yourself." The bank eventually sent a final update confirming the reversal was complete, and my name cleared. The words felt definitive. I forwarded the email to my parents without commentary. Fact spoke better than emotion now. My mother replied with a brief, "Thank you." My father did not respond at all. I expected that silence to hurt more than it did. Instead, it felt like an honest ending to a conversation we were never really having. On a quiet Sunday morning, I took a walk alone, hands in my pockets, breath fogging the air. I thought about what came next, not in dramatic terms, but in practical ones. Where I wanted to live, what I wanted my finances to look like, how much access I was willing to give my family moving forward. The answers came slowly but clearly. I would have a relationship with them only if it respected my boundaries. No shared accounts, no guarantees, no quiet expectations that I would step in when things went wrong. If that meant distance, so be it. That decision did not feel like punishment. It felt like self-respect. That evening, Grace called to check in. "So," she asked, "how does it feel on the other side?" I thought about it. "It feels unfinished," I said, "but not unresolved." She hummed thoughtfully. "That is real life," she said. "Endings are messy." After the call, I sat with that truth. Stories did not always end with clean reconciliations or dramatic exits. Sometimes they ended with acceptance and a long stretch of learning how to live differently. Before bed, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother. Just one line. "If you are willing, I would like to try again. Slowly. On your terms." I stared at the words until the screen dimmed. I did not answer right away. I lay back against the pillows, listening to the quiet house, and felt the weight of the choice in front of me. Not a battle anymore. Not a standoff. A decision about what kind of future I wanted, and who would be allowed into it. That answer was forming, steady and clear, and I knew when morning came, I would be ready to say it out loud. The first thing I noticed when I woke up was the absence of urgency. No spike of adrenaline, no instinctive scan for danger. Just a quiet awareness of the room, the soft light filtering through the curtains, the steady rhythm of my own breathing. It took me a moment to understand why that felt so unfamiliar. For the first time in a long while, nothing was demanding me. I stayed still, letting that realization settle. In my parents' house, mornings had always carried an invisible weight. Someone's mood, someone's need, someone else's mistake waiting to be cleaned up. Even as an adult, even with my own job and savings and car, that pressure had followed me like a shadow. That morning, it was gone. When I reached for my phone, I did it calmly. No rush, no fear. The screen lit up with a single notification I already knew was there. If you are willing, I would like to try again. Slowly. On your terms. I read the message once, then locked the screen and set the phone back down. I did not feel guilty for not answering right away. I felt deliberate. I got out of bed and walked into the kitchen. Dawn's house smelled faintly of coffee and clean linen, the quiet kind of order that does not come from control, but from care. I poured myself a cup and sat at the small table, watching the steam rise, thinking about how much had changed in such a short time. For weeks, my mind had been fixed on what was taken from me: the car, the savings, the sense of safety I thought I had in my own family. But sitting there with my hands wrapped around the mug, I realized that focusing only on loss missed something important. I had also reclaimed things I did not even know I had given away. I had reclaimed my voice, my time, my right to say no without explaining myself into exhaustion. I had reclaimed the simple dignity of being asked instead of assumed. I thought about my sister, and instead of anger, what surfaced was distance. She was still furious, still telling her version of the story, still insisting I had ruined her life. She might always believe that. And for the first time, I accepted that her understanding was not required for my peace. Not everyone who benefits from your silence will forgive you for speaking. My parents were harder to place emotionally. I could see them now with clarity that hurt more than denial ever had. They loved me, but not enough to respect my autonomy when it conflicted with their plans. They saw my strength as something they could borrow indefinitely. That realization did not make me hate them. It made me stop expecting them to be different. I picked up my phone again and began to type, slowly and carefully. I am willing to talk, I wrote, slowly, with boundaries. That means no financial discussions, no legal requests, and full honesty. If those boundaries are crossed, I will step back again. I read it twice, feeling the firmness of the words, then sent it. The message felt like a door opening, but only halfway, with my hand still on the handle. Later that morning, I went outside for a walk. The air was cold enough to sting, grounding enough to clear my head. I watched people move through their lives without knowing anything about mine. A woman juggling grocery bags, a man shoveling snow with quiet determination, a couple laughing as they argued about directions. Life did not stop for family drama. It kept going, and I could go with it. As I walked, I thought about the word revenge, how often it had been used when people heard my story. They expected bitterness. They expected satisfaction at someone else's downfall. But revenge, for me, had never been about punishment. It was about withdrawal. Withdrawing my silence. Withdrawing my compliance. Withdrawing the endless emotional labor that kept everyone else comfortable at my expense. The consequences that followed were not something I orchestrated with malice. They were what happened when I stopped intercepting the impact of other people's choices. That distinction mattered. When I returned to the house, I sat on the edge of the bed and wrote something in my notebook. A sentence I wanted to remember when doubt crept back in. You are allowed to protect yourself even when others are disappointed. The afternoon passed without incident. I answered a few work emails. I made lunch. I did nothing dramatic. The ordinariness felt like a gift. In the early evening, my phone buzzed again. My mother had replied, "Thank you. I understand." I will respect that. I stared at the message for a long moment. I did not know if it would last. Respect had never been their strong suit when fear entered the picture. But for the first time, my sense of safety did not depend on their follow-through. That night, I cooked dinner for myself. Slowly, deliberately. I ate without distraction. I let the silence stretch without filling it with worry. Before bed, I caught my reflection in the mirror and paused. I looked older somehow, not in years, but in presence. Less eager to please, less afraid of disapproval. I thought about the woman who had packed her bags quietly and walked out on Christmas morning, heart pounding, future uncertain. She had not known how things would turn out. She had only known she could not stay. That had been enough. As I lay down, the weight of everything settled into something manageable. Not a perfect ending, not a healed family, but a clear path forward. Some relationships would remain strained. Some apologies would never come. That was no longer the measure of my worth. What mattered was this. I had stopped confusing endurance with love. I had stopped believing my value came from how much I could give away. I had chosen myself without becoming cruel, without losing my compassion. If you are listening to this and something in you feels exposed, if you have been the strong one, the reliable one, the person everyone leans on while quietly leaning too hard, I want you to hear this. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. If this story touched something real for you, I invite you to share your thoughts. What boundary are you still afraid to draw? What would choosing yourself look like in your life? And if you want to stay for more stories about family, justice, and the quiet strength it takes to walk away with dignity, stay here. There is more to come, and none of us have to face it alone. New ban muon toi tieptuk fien ban thutu kwa chung moi he. Hai noi tieptuk.